State and own this by phone, right?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Jamestown Public School Board to order. It is Monday, February 17th, 2025, 5:30 p.m. in the Thompson Community Room. We'd like to welcome all those in the audience this evening. Note that board member Owen McKenna is joining us by phone today. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jamie, would you be willing to read the school board norms?
Of course.
Thank you.
The board developed norms are to share and respect opinions and speak with united voice once a decision has been reached. Execute all duties of school board in compliance with North Dakota Century Code. Properly prepare for meetings. Commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for all stakeholders.
Thank you, Jamie. Moving on our agenda, nothing under communications. Any conflicts of interest to declare? Any conflicts of interest? Any conflicts of interest? Owen and Jacob, you want to declare the same conflict?
Yeah.
Okay.
JEA.
Same as last time?
Same as previous.
Okay, thanks. Other than that, any other conflicts of interest? Okay. Consent agenda, is there a motion, or if there's anything you'd like removed? Motion by Steve? Second by Jamie. We have a motion, a second for approval of the consent agenda. Any discussion? And if there's anything you'd like removed, we can certainly do that. Any discussion or any clarifications? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Aye. Motion approved. Moving into our regular meeting, nothing under recognition. Under correspondence, we have a thank you from the in remembrance of the Jerry Miller family. Under reports, we have a boundary study report. So we have RSP and associates here. Please come forward. Do you want by the virtually? Okay. And then are we just on the screen then? Yep.
So RSP is joining us virtually. As we talked about in previous meetings, we wanted to have this boundary study and enrollment analysis as quickly as possible, which meant the quickest we could do this was to have them attend virtually. And so they have accommodated us, and thank you, Mr. Armitage and our tech department, for making sure that this was a workable solution for us. And just a reminder, for these kinds of Zoom calls, they're linked into our microphones. So if you do have a question, just make sure that you are pressing the button so they can hear you online. Okay?
And then we could just have you state your name for our board minutes before you start from
Absolutely.
RSP.
My name is Jenna Wallace with RSP. Is everyone able to hear me and see the screen?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll go ahead and get started tonight. Like I said, my name is Jenna Wallace with RSP. We're a planning firm based out of Kansas City, but work all over the Midwest, assisting school districts with enrollment planning and other facility decisions. Tonight, I'm going to really have two main topics of information to present to you all. The first is the results of the 2024-25 enrollment analysis. So I'm going to very briefly kind of go over those main variables, how we go through understanding student data and leading into a 5-year enrollment analysis that will be used as the foundation for our boundary considerations. So part 2, I have some different visuals to look at a potential boundary movement for phase 1 and phase 2. And then lastly, we'll have some next steps and opportunity for you all to ask any questions about any of the information tonight. This first part, enrollment analysis, We have the district continuing to decrease over these next 5 years, a more stable enrollment with a decrease of about 85 students district-wide. You can see here when I get into that, the majority of that loss is more at the elementary and middle school, as high school more stabilizes these next 5 years. We'll talk more about capacity when we get into what those boundary potential scenarios look like and how we balance our enrollment to capacity, looking at our different facility uses these next 5 years. This first visual of the report is looking at the methodology of the RSP forecasting model. And so if you follow this map here, we're showing what one planning area looks like. So a planning area is really the building block of the forecasting model. All of the information in tonight's report goes into what each planning area is. And so we're creating planning areas based on those neighborhood lines, natural barriers, major roadways, the attendance boundaries, and then each planning area is individually analyzed in the forecasting model. So this really just goes in to show how granular we're able to get with the student data. Each planning area / neighborhood is analyzed for their census data, their county data, the student data. And then when we pivot into those boundaries, that's how we can show what the different projections would look like if you move certain neighborhoods around, if you move these planning areas. What does that mean for projected enrollment? So just a little bit into this information about really what is into that sophisticated forecast model. Everything in the model is going to lean more towards that indication of enrollment growth or indication of enrollment decrease. And so what the model's doing is taking all that information and setting the most likely forecast. And so some of these variables that I'll pull up later will be more of that growth model, and some are more limitations. This first visual here is looking at the relationship between housing, population, and enrollment growth. And so we've seen pretty limited housing development. There was the uptick in 23-24 school year. But then these past couple of years, we've leaned more to a population loss and enrollment loss. And so that correlation more leaning towards a limited growth model. We tracked here what the live birth rate is for the county. And so looking at a pretty stable live birth rate, and that birth rate is really, you can see, very stable with that population under 5 years of age. So we're looking at a very natural market share of what that potential kindergarten class would be. Not many swings up and down from this variable. Our past enrollment by grade is definitely a key slide to looking at what enrollment has been happening these past 10 years. We've had 2 years of district loss that has been creating larger grades in the secondary and smaller grades in the elementary. So a good rule of thumb when you're looking at enrollment data is looking at that senior class as they graduate and organically leave the system. Are they being fully replaced by the incoming kindergarten class? And so in this case, we are saying these upcoming senior classes, larger than 150 students, with our incoming grades closer to around 120 to 130. And so that's going to be a very hard class to replace as they organically leave. And it would be reliant on cohort growth year to year. Which leads into this next visual of what is the trends of cohort change year to year. So as a class of second graders become third graders, what's the tendency to pick up kids? We do see a great cohort growth at the 8th to 9th grade level, likely students coming into that high school experience, and some other years where we see more of a cohort loss. And so all of that's factored in to that grade by grade projection. Our in and out migration focuses on the new students coming into the district. That's the orange bars. And past students exiting the district. That's the green bars. And so we have a pretty net low really, when we look at the difference of in and out every year, a net change of less than 50 students the past 2 years. And so a pretty stable migration trend of how many students are coming in or fully replacing those students leaving. And then our out of district trends. So this is looking at all students that when we geocoded their addresses reside out of the district boundary. So in this case, this variable, we have seen some loss from this population where we're seeing less students residing from out of the district boundary. And then the next two visuals are some student maps that look at where students are living in the district. So a count change visual here is looking at the different neighborhoods that have been increasing in student count. So those are these areas that are darker orange. Their neighborhood subdivision life cycle has been increasing. While in the green areas, we've seen that count change decrease, maybe some aging in place or some neighborhoods that aren't turning over, and the student count has been decreasing these past 5 years. And then we have total student density here in this heat map. So the greater that heat in red visual, the greater density of students. So we know that there's different things happening at that neighborhood level throughout the district. Some housing units are leaning more toward enrollment growth, and some are in the cycle where they're decreasing, and we're factoring all that in at that level of the planning areas. We've also included some different census data from the housing market. So knowing what is the home value, household income, mortgage, and year built, all of that goes into those planning areas of what is the relationship of the housing market with our students. Looking at the recent year built, so looking at how many units have been built over these past 5 years, we had the greatest amount of activity in 2023 with Eagle Flats apartments coming online. But other than that, these past 5 years, we've been building less than 10 units per year. And that correlates with this visual of the student yield rate. And so a yield rate is the number of students we have coming from a housing unit. So in this case, that purple is the number of students per 100 single family units. And then the pink is 100 students per 100 multifamily units. And then the teal color is students per 100 mobile home units. And so all these different housing types have a different relationship with how many students we generally see from that housing product. And we also track this over time. And so we can see with this visual that we have been seeing a decreasing yield rate for our single family units, which is a limitation to that residential turnover and generation of students. The multifamily has been slightly increasing. So as likely that new housing inventory, Eagle Flats came online, we're seeing more students from multifamily, so apartments, townhomes, that type of housing product. And then the mobile home park units, a bit more fluctuation over these past 10 years. But generally has a higher yield rate than the past. And so we're seeing a bit of an uptick from students from the mobile home households as well. So all this information helps us put together this visual of what are the areas that potential housing may come online the next 5 to 10 years. And so the green areas, we have countryside estates continuing to build out the next couple of years. And then some areas identified by speaking with the city and county planners that could be potential developments over the next 5 to 10 years. But those areas would require some different infrastructure updates and developer interest. But we want to put that on the radar as some areas for potential development over this next decade. So moving a little bit into our projections here, this first visual looks at the comparison of our class sizes. And so this first visual is looking over time, what has been the difference between that kindergarten and 12th grade class. We have this forecasted to continue as a greater 12th grade class than that incoming kindergarten. So we have a pretty stable kindergarten enrollment, and with that market share of our birth rate being very stable, we forecast kindergarten to maintain around that 130 students. But with our larger grades coming into the high school and positive cohort growth from 8th to 9th grade, we see those senior classes becoming larger to that kindergarten, which is that limitation to that district-wide growth. So overall, this is your first visual of the overall projections. We have the elementary enrollment to forecasted to decrease by about 43 students over the next 5 years. Middle school forecasted to decrease by 38 students over the next 5 years. And high school forecasted to decrease by just 4 students. And you can see in some years that comes up and back down, more of a stable high school enrollment at around 720 students. So the next thing we provide is, this is based off all of the current facilities. So if you maintain all buildings next year and over the next 5 years, what are the projections by building? We also break this down by a couple different ways, and I'll go through that pretty quickly, and just know that our different numbers here are really to help you guys use this tool in whatever way would be most beneficial. So the numbers that we provide in the middle row, green font, is the number of students projected by reside. So how many students do we physically think live in, say, Gusner boundary? The blue font bottom row is the number of students we have forecasted to attend that building. And so there's a difference of reside and attend when we look at intra-district movement, ELL placement, as well as maybe just some student options between the schools that impact that not everyone who resides attend. And so we're trying to show what that most realistic number would be through both lenses. When I move into our boundary discussion in just a little bit, I will be focusing on that reside enrollment. And that's going to be the best way to make boundary decisions and talk about how many students live throughout the district. And so I'm going to be focusing on these green numbers, reside enrollment. The other information on this slide is looking at the projected building enrollment to our district capacity. And so the green shading indicates when the building is forecasted to occupy less than 70% of that capacity. And so you can see we have some underutilization challenges within our current inventory, especially at Lewis L'Amour, Roosevelt, Washington, and our middle school. And so we don't have any buildings over capacity, but we do have some underutilization challenges. So in conclusion there, we have some different variables that are working together to produce this final enrollment analysis. Some challenges that we want to address with our next steps of potential boundary and facility usage. All in all, trying to get at what is the best distribution of students at all our facilities, and how can we plan to best support those students. So before I go into this part 2, is there any questions on any of those slides? Is there any information that I could explain a bit more in depth? This is not all the slides in the enrollment analysis. It's just that executive summary.
Are there any questions from the board? Jason?
On slide 19, when you talk yield rate comparisons, are we looking at just Jamestown public school students, or is that like demographics of the children in Jamestown? Does that make sense? Are we only looking at current JPS students?
Yes, we're only looking at official students in the district over the past 10 years, not the full census population, just students in your district.
Any other questions? If not, continue.
All right, perfect. So the next part is going to go through this boundary analysis that our team has met with district administration on. This process here, we started with the enrollment analysis. So that information that I just presented to you was the baseline for all conversations revolving around potential boundaries. We met with the district admin team 4 times between really just throughout the month of January. And each time the feedback from that meeting guided the boundary conversation a different way to have a very natural evolution to land on tonight's recommendations. I do have these boundaries broken up into 2 different phases. And so phase 1, when I say that, I'm talking about the 25-26 implementation. And so with Washington going offline, we would need to create a boundary plan that does that and distributes students between the other facilities for that 25-26 and 26-27 school year. Phase 2, that's more of your long-term considerations as you guys go out for a potential bond and talk about what a different building may look like. We have 2 different options to consider if the potential rebuild is a 2-section or a 3-section facility. And so this visual here goes through what those decision points would be. For the 25-26 decision point, we have 2 options for you to consider tonight. Phase 1A is more of a minimal boundary change. Phase 1B is more boundary change, not as minimal as phase 1A, and there's some different pros and cons that we'll talk about. And then 27-28, when we would reopen Washington, the differences of phase 2A or 2B is whether Washington reopens as a 2-section or a 3-section building. Some other key considerations that really build the foundation of this process and the recommendations I'll present is looking in this box down here. And so one goal was to try to minimize student movement, especially between phases. So if you are a student that would be potentially impacted in phase 1, we were trying to not impact you in phase 2. The next consideration is the location of our EL programming. And so in the options, as it's currently at Washington and Roosevelt, this switches over into our options for Gusner and Roosevelt becoming the EL student schools. This helps with some enrollment distribution as well as balancing some demographics in the facilities. And that's that last bullet point of while we're looking at balancing enrollment, let's try to ensure that we're balancing the demographics of our students as well. So the first map here, this is just to familiarize your guys with your current boundaries. So the phase 1, we would be looking at Washington, so that yellow area being redistributed between our other schools. And then in phase 2, when that building comes back online, we'll look at the different options of a 2-section versus a 3-section facility. With our current projections, so this is that same information that was presented in part 1, focusing on the reside enrollment. You can see in this case for Louis L'Amour, we are projecting around 90 to 85 students residing in that boundary. This would be less than that 70% utilization. And then Roosevelt, around 180 students. That would be less than the 70% utilization. And then Washington, so this is that 115 to about 100 students over the next 5 years. We would be looking at how would we distribute those students in this phase 1 of the boundary plan. All right, so phase 1A, this is looking at what a more of a minimal change would be for the next 2 school years. In this case, we have area 1 highlighted, which is the current Washington boundary that would be extended into Lincoln. So Lincoln Elementary expands west into the original Washington boundary. To do this, we can't completely keep all of Lincoln. And so there's more of some movement south in that South Lincoln Island. So in this case, area 2 goes into Louis L'Amour, expanding that boundary and increasing enrollment there. And then area 3, we have Roosevelt Elementary expanding west to the river into that original Lincoln boundary as well. So trying to balance enrollment between all of our facilities as we move into this period of Washington being offline. So the projections for this concept are we're really focused on these 2 school years, starting in 27-28 to 29-30 would be potentially changed by that phase 2. So the numbers here are just to illustrate if phase 2 doesn't happen, what the balance could be, but we're really looking at implementation of the 25-26 and 26-27 school year. So looking at this potential distribution of students, Gusner stabilizes by around 220 students. That's about an 80% utilization of the facility. Lincoln Elementary, around 215 students. Lemoore increases to about 130 students, and that's about an 88% utilization of that building. And then Roosevelt at a 225 students, around an 82% utilization of that facility. So this is based on that student reside with the movement of our EL students. So we were able to take those students and put them into what would be the new EL program, so Gusner and Roosevelt. But then it would be assuming everybody attends where they reside in those boundaries. So there may be still a little shifting with that intra-district movement, but this provides a pretty good balance between all 4 facilities between that 80 to 90% utilization of each school. We also have some different analysis tables for this concept. So I won't go through all these, but just know that there's a lot of data behind each of these visuals. In this case, the first table is looking at what our potential impact on students would be. We would be adjusting 151 potential students in this concept. And then we have a bit of an improved balance between our demographics. And so looking at race and ethnicity and our FRL and ELL balance with phase 1A. All right, so with that goes in through all that phase 1A. Like I said, that's more of the minimal adjustments. We're really just focusing on adjusting students from the current Washington boundary and balancing students in the South. Phase 1B does a little bit more balancing on the demographic lens of our students. So you'll see here, area 1 is the same area that would be expanded. So when Washington closes, Lincoln extends over to the west side to expand the original Washington boundary. That's the same as phase 1A. Area 2 and area 3, that's all the same as phase 1A, as well as Louis expands north and Roosevelt expands over to the west. The difference between 1A and 1B comes with these areas highlighted in number 4. And so there's a bit more, I would say, kind of massaging of the boundary between Gusner and Lincoln to improve balance and demographics between the schools. And so the northern part, this area that I'm highlighting, is originally Gusner, and it would move into Lincoln. And then the south of 19th Street, the 2 areas labeled 4, are currently Lincoln areas that would move into Gusner. And so this is something that RSB kind of calls a double move. We have some students moving out of the boundary and other students moving in to get at an enrollment and demographic balance that would be desirable. It has a greater impact on students, but that's just something to consider when we look at more of a minimal change versus a more change. So in this case, for the attendance boundaries, we still have a great balance between all 4 facilities, between that 80 to 90% utilization. Gusner, in this case, pretty stable around 220 students. Lincoln around 215. And then Louis Lemoore and Roosevelt, that's going to be those same numbers. The change with 1B is between Gusner and Lincoln. So really the difference of 1B comes down to this slide on 36, where we have more change if you look at the Gusner and Lincoln lines, where there's more students, 41 coming out of Lincoln 31 out of Gustner into Lincoln. And so these numbers work pretty well with keeping enrollment the same. What they improve is our demographic balance. So increasing Gustner to a more similar FRL percentage as the other facilities, creating more of an equitable experience between those 4 facilities. And then in this case, we have an increase of students impacted. So phase 1A was looking at that about 150 student impact. Phase 1B, around 220 student impact. So that's a pretty high level overview of the 2 differences between this first phase of a boundary consideration. Some of the pros and cons are listed out here below. In phase 1A, Lincoln would keep its current boundary on the north side, but then in phase 1B, the current Lincoln boundary on the north side is more redistributed with Gustner. Phase 1A, Gustner geographically is not impacted. The only increase in that school projections is due to the ELL student movement. But then phase 1B, Gustner has a bit more of that geographic change, so that all 4 schools would have a boundary adjustment. We have more of an impact here in phase 1B with the 223 students impacted. But then looking at the FRL balance in 1B, you have a difference of your schools reduced from a 33% difference to a 10% increase. So all schools have a more similar FRL percentages. Phase 1A, a pretty similar where the difference between our schools would be 25.8%. So still an improvement from the current demographic balance, but phase 1B goes a little bit farther to balance that percentages. And so that goes through phase 1. I can pause here for questions or discussions, or I can kind of keep going into phase 2, and then we could have one discussion at the end. I can pivot to however you guys would like to do this.
Just let's see if there's any questions from the board so far in this process. Dan.
Just kind of looking at the numbers a little bit about the population shift, as these are all based off reside, right? This is not the actual, okay. So are we accounting for, which schools take a bigger percentage leap that maybe they, and how do we prepare for that? It's probably not so much a question for RSP, but for just in our planning.
Like the phases, like
It-
which
like in the
between the phases,
phases.
there's more impact for one and more of a movement, right?
Greater percentage increase.
Yeah. Dr. Leck.
I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you,
Yeah, I'm just comparing percentages.
yep. Well, yeah, it really is going to depend on what option we select, because, I mean, really, if you look at phase 1, outside of, we know we have a large number of students that are Washington students that are absorbing a large portion of that number. So 50 to 60 students are, projected to move based on that phase, where that gets much significantly higher in 1B. But yes, we would have to be thinking, we would have to be thinking about what that transition would look like. Another decision that would need to be made is, what would we do with waivers? We know the impact the legacy waivers that have had on the district for many, many years. And so, to make that transition, we would have to make hard decisions in terms of how we want to act with waivers, either understanding that there are going to be implications to class size if we allow waivers to continue, and there'll be movements if we did not.
Yeah, so my question is probably more geared towards the next phase, less about this boundary study, but more towards
the
Follow-on activity of actually replacing students.
so I'm not sure that I fully understand your question.
Just school, each school's going to have to make an adjustment to absorb the kids.
Absolutely, yes.
So
I see what you're saying. Correct, correct.
well, this is just even phase, even just phase one, phase A. It'll be an impact. Yeah, I mean, it looks like we would more in,
And we do have to understand that we have, in some of our, we're looking at fairly large numbers, but overall class sizes are still, even with the change, on an average level, are still under 20. So yes, there will be changes. Thank you. Yes, there's going to be changes, but not insurmountable changes. But will there be impacts? Absolutely. You're taking a single section out of the equation. There's absolutely going to be impacts. Confident I answered your question.
more for awareness than anything. That's
Okay,
all.
thank you.
Yep.
And thank you to our technical support here in getting our microphones back online. Jacob, did you have a question? Or who was that? I missed who was first. Jacob first, maybe, or Melissa, go ahead.
And this, again, is going to be more question for Dr. Leck. I think with the EL students going into Gessner, how is that going to affect the current programs that are there? Are any of those current programs that are there going to have to be moved to accommodate those ELL students coming into Gessner?
We would not see any likely change for programming. And if we're talking, specifically early childhood special education, I would not see that as there being any program loss or shift at this time based on this consolidation. There might be time in our future where we look to, say there were another building brought on or a replacement of Lincoln. At that time, would it be a consideration? If that could be better suited to that program, better suited at the new building, if that were to be the community's wishes, I think you could consider that. But in the short term, I do not see that.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern, is that we aren't going to move some of those those populations more than once.
Correct. Yeah, I think we can accommodate right now.
Jacob, yep.
Yep, this is an observation kind of for both 1B and 1A, is the section of Louis, or the area of the Louis Moore district that was split into 2 and 3 on the maps. I'm just wondering if that was specifically because of residential housing numbers. If there's any way for the school to look at how many students are actually living in that specifically Section 2 area, just because the river is an actual physical boundary, and as a parent who drives to the Louis L'Amour neighborhood on a daily basis, getting up there from that area of town isn't the easiest. That I would look at, if we could potentially look at putting that neighborhood into the Roosevelt boundary, and see what the numbers do. It looks like Roosevelt was lower on the capacity percentages, but just something to consider moving forward, that maybe we need a 1C to kind of account for that. Just, again, for an actual physical boundary that I don't think was accounted for in the planning.
Could we talk about what is the student impact in that number 2?
Absolutely. That's going to be looking at the Lincoln area that goes into Louis L'Amour. So K4, so we would take out the current 5th graders because that's next year's 1st to 5th grade, and it's 32 students. That would be in, sorry, one second, this area too. So that could be potentially accommodated by Roosevelt. We could look at that. The only other consideration would be, is there a different area that could be potentially expanded into Louis L'Amour to bring that building above that 70% utilization? And if it's not area 2, is there somewhere else that would be better transportation-wise? Does that answer your
Yeah.
question?
We'll have to take a look at those
Yeah,
factors.
absolutely. It's just, again, from personal experience, I think it's something we need to consider. And I don't know if we can pull or ask families in that neighborhood specifically. That might be more on the district side of things. But something to consider. Maybe parents won't care. Maybe they want to go to Louis, and they might choose a waiver to go up there on their own anyway. But I think something to consider before we start assigning people places.
And we can get a little more granular as to like, what
Yeah.
are the total numbers?
Yeah.
In, what is the impact of that little stretch in there, so.
Right, and
Thanks,
if there,
Jacob.
yeah, if there is a change in that, with that group, that would keep Louis obviously very consistent with where it's at right now, which is underutilization, but pushing that section 2 in there does push it to the highest, at least in 1A, at 88% utilization, which is on the higher range. So I think there is justification to at least look a little deeper into that area 2.
Jason?
I may have missed this basic question somewhere, but is the plan then for Gusner to be our only ELL location?
Gusner and Roosevelt.
Gusner and Roosevelt.
Roosevelt currently, and
Roosevelt,
then-
okay.
Yep, and Gusner would shift. Right now, Washington and Roosevelt, it would shift to Gusner and Roosevelt.
Any other questions? Okay, please continue.
Absolutely. All right, so moving into phase 2, we would be looking at what a potential boundary would look like if when Washington comes back online, if it's a 2-section or a 3-section building. And so the other thing that we are trying to promote with phase 2 is that minimal impact on students. There will be some double impact, just there has to be with Washington students being redistributed to Lincoln and then coming back into Washington. That's something that we can't get around. But as far as the other neighborhoods in the district, trying to create a boundary where they're only impacted in that phase 1 or phase 2 era. So phase 2A, where Washington reopens as a 2-section, we, in this case, take Lincoln offline. So all of that current Lincoln boundary becomes into the Washington boundary. And so in this case, you'll see the same areas that are highlighted in phase 1B, because this was the best boundary to balance between Gusner and the new Washington as it reopens with the current Lincoln area in their boundary. The area on the south side, those 2 areas, that 2 and 3 that we identified, those would stay the same, so there's no double impact. In this case with 2A, we would just be reopening Washington and saying everybody in the Lincoln boundary would move back into Washington. You can think about the difference of the 2 impacts as a little bit different because it depends on what you do in phase 1. And so if it's phase 1A, where there's the more minimal adjustment in phase 1, there's a bit more impact in phase 2. If you do more adjustment in phase 1B, you have a smoother transition into phase 2. And that's just the difference of that student population by not impacting kids twice. It's more of a timing element of, do you impact these different neighborhoods in the current, so the 25-26 school year, or that 27-28 school year. So in this case, phase 2A, when we would bring Washington back online as a 275 capacity building, Lincoln would close, so those students would be redistributed. In this case, Gusner would look at around a 220 to a 240 building. Louis L'Amour at around 130 students. So if you think back to that area that we just talked about for area number 2, if we take there's around 30 to 40 students in that area. And so we would be assuming around 100 students in Louis L'Amour. But we'll get more in those for sure projections, but you can kind of rationalize that if that area is something you would want to move into Roosevelt. And then lastly, Washington, as it reopens as a 2-section, in this case, it would be around 190 students at about a 70% utilization. So similar analysis here, but you have two tables of that students impacted, and it is the dependent on if you did phase 1A or if you did phase 1B. So I'm hoping that makes sense with everybody. If you do phase 1A, where there's more of the minimal adjustments, you're impacting around 120 students by the time of 27, 28, versus 1B, when there's more of that initial impact. When you get to phase 2A, you would just be taking current Lincoln students back into Washington and impacting around assumed 100 students in that time period. And then the last two tables are that demographic analysis, and these are going to be very similar to the phase 1B demographics, where we bring Gusner up to around that 38.6% FRL. So then phase 2B, the difference here is that when we would bring Washington back online as a 3-section building, we would be potentially moving Lincoln and Louis L'Amour offline. So in this case, Washington boundary becomes reestablished. It has the same boundary before the Roosevelt and Washington break, but it extends on the south side, moving students that are currently in that Louis L'Amour boundary into Washington as well. So the difference between 2A and 2B is really the south side of if the building is a 2-section or a 3-section capacity. So the values in this table would be looking at distributing between our 3 schools. Washington, you can see that's going to be now a 400 building, and so they're able to serve more students by being 3 sections. In this case, this boundary has a very good balance between all 3 schools, where they're all between that 80 to 85% utilization. Washington would reopen with around 320 students residing in that boundary. Roosevelt, similar number than what you guys have seen, around that 220, and Gusner around that 220 to 240 number as well. So the same student analysis here on page 45. The difference between the 2A and 2B, there's going to be more impact in this concept because you're redistributing our Louis L'Amour students. So in this case, you have the 71 current K2 students residing in that area that would be potentially adjusted into Washington in phase 2B. In phase 2A, you won't see that 70 students because they're going to stay at their building. And then last, the same, very similar demographic balance as we're looking at very similar boundaries. With Washington expanded to that 3-section, they would be looking at around a 41% FRL. So here then, in conclusion, the differences between what 2A and 2B would be looking at is really the size of what Washington gets reopened at. And if you retire just Lincoln or Lincoln and Louis L'Amour. And then the impact range in that bottom bullet point is looking on if you implemented phase 1A or 1B. So if it's more of a initial impact, that would be preferred by the community versus waiting until phase 2. Those are kind of those differences that we want you as the board to weigh in on and see if there's a better plan that you would think would be most appreciated from the community. So with that, is there any questions or discussion on phase 2?
Melissa.
I don't know, maybe I'm just missing it in here, but are you then assuming that there is going to be 0 growth in the Louis L'Amour area? Like there will be no students moving, there will be no housing development in that area, nothing is going to be happening in that area, even though there is all kinds of space up there for that to happen?
No, we do have the potential growth areas factored into the report. So based on those like yield rate analysis and those growth areas, that is factored into the building projections.
Melissa, on slide 20, there's like some current 5-year and 10-year. There was information overload, I know. There is, so like in a 10-year looking, there's a section for current 5 and a section for 5-year and 10-year in my vision for that Louis Lomar area that would be, I'm assuming is factored into this.
Exactly.
I was looking at that same thing, so. I can come back to you, Melissa, if you have other questions. Jamie's next.
I was, excuse me, just curious, in both 2A and 2B, it looks like the New Washington School would be the least utilized capacity-wise on both of those models? Is that?
That would be accurate, yes. And that more so comes into trying to minimize impact between our other schools. And so there might be opportunity for some massaging of the boundaries if you would want to maybe move those students, but we might get into the situation where it would be the same student population that may be impacted in phase 1. And so that's why in this recommendation, it's a little bit lower, but that could be some feedback that we look at if we want to try to expand Washington projections.
Dan, did you have a question? No.
It's more of a clarification from Melissa's question. I think the future growth is accounted for in slide 29. Is that, just make sure we're understanding that? Slide 29 has all those projections loaded in, and then any future ones are just basically redistributing students amongst that table. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Any other questions from the board at this time? Continue on. I think there's a few more slides left, correct?
I think so. Just a couple next steps. So this first visual here, just kind of wrapping up. So I kind of provided that data foundation. We went into that concept creation and your board input tonight. And so really that phase 1 is the more important for that short-term input and making sure you can implement these facility additions next year. And so I want to just kind of take any final input. If there's anything else you need from RSP to look at, if it is a phase 1C or anything else there for these next steps.
Any other questions from the board? Dr. Leck has
I just had one additional thought as we were going through the second, the phase 2 options. Just did a little math, and with Mr. Meyer's question, if we made that shift from Roosevelt, or I'm sorry, from Louis L'Amour in that section, that number 2, over to Roosevelt, that pushes the capacity of Roosevelt in the low to mid 90% capacity. So there is impact there that needs to be considered too. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't want to look at an 1C, but just some quick math show that would push that capacity probably higher at Roosevelt than it might precipitate some other change or need to have some other discussion there.
I just had whatever Melissa asked about the EL. If we get to the next steps of a new Washington, would we anticipate, and maybe we haven't talked about this yet, but would we anticipate EL to be offered there, space there, just for space-wise? You know, like would that free up space at Lincoln, or how would we?
Well, I suppose that depends on what option is selected. You know, if it's if we go down the road of referendum and it's a 2-building section or a 2-section building or a 3-section building, And it depends on our EL population, and that, if that continues the same growth trajectory as now, we might be looking at expanding EL programming to every building at the elementary level. It's simply hard to say. But I would not think just because of opening Washington, you would have EL return to that building unless it's necessary to balance enrollments. I think once you make that change, you make that change.
And that is what's assumed in those numbers. So when we move the EL into Gusner, we're assuming that stays at Gusner for phase 2.
Thank you. Other questions from the board at this time? From RSP? Yep, go ahead.
If there was a recommendation, I would make a few different options available. We need to look as a district at phase 1, which is our biggest priority. There's a few different ways to look at this. You have an option of 1A, you have an option of 1B. There's discussion if maybe 1C is needed to be looked at, or if there's additional, something that we haven't discussed yet that would be considered a different option than what's available. My recommendation would be if it's not 1A or 1B that the board is feeling the most comfortable with, then I would suggest that you make a motion to refer that to the facilities committee and then have greater conversation at the facilities committee level, and then at the next meeting bring, I could continue to work with RSP and bring that to facilities committee, and we could have a recommendation at the next meeting if you need more time to process or want more discussion away from simply 1A or 1B.
Is the board interested in heading in any direction? Aaron, go ahead.
I just want to take a step back on just going back to that EL discussion, since that is kind of a bigger or a large impact and a growing impact. I guess I'm not smart enough to know, but what is the best model for teaching EL? And just in the case where is a centralized model better than a distributed model? When you consider somebody who does need that intensive, who's coming in right off the port of entry there, and they're fresh to the English language, and they're on an island by themselves in a classroom. Is that the best model for some of these kids? As you progress and mature through the EL program, I can see a more distributed model, but does a centralized model make more sense in some cases here? And is that something that we should consider as a part of this as well?
Dr. Leck?
Well, I think it depends on a lot of factors, including the volume, the needs. Are we talking level 1 EL needs versus a level 5 EL need? All of those factors come into play. And I think schools in North Dakota, across North Dakota, Jamestown included, are struggling with how to best serve that population because it is increasing in number. And I think that's a decision we'll need to make as it goes, as we see the trajectory of that population. Is it going to continue to grow? If it continues to grow, we need to make it different. I think the plan needs to look differently. But in terms of what is best for next year, based on the numbers right now, it would seem like 2 schools is the best model for right now.
That's something that could be more of a mutually exclusive conversation that doesn't need to be as a part of this boundary.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I just think there's so many more factors than just with that particular discussion than just boundaries. But in the short term, we need to make a decision on, because Washington is a school that's servicing EL students, and what the impact centralized, to have that only be one building, you have to look at the other impacts, for those students. Is a new immigration center or a new American center type of model a better model that would transition out to? There's a lot of different ways to look at our EL population, and so many of it is triggered at the enrollment. At what point does that become what needs to happen? So a lot of factors.
I am all for the least amount of change and the least amount of transition for students. I think I'd be comfortable motioning that we would move forward with phase 1A. If I'm reading that correctly, that is the minimal amount of students being affected and minimum amount of families being affected.
Okay. There's a motion for the district to move in the outline described in the report to follow phase 1A for the boundaries. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Jason. So we have a motion and a second. Discussion. Aaron.
Yeah, there's a lot of information that's been put in front of us last few days here, and I don't feel very comfortable at all voting on a recommendation that impacts this level of the community, so I wouldn't know how to vote on this one here, to be honest with you. I read through the presentation. I understand what the data's in it. What I don't understand is the operational impacts and what's best for the district, what's best for the parents, what's best for the teachers, which I don't know. I don't have enough information yet.
Okay. Other discussion? Jacob.
Similar feeling to Aaron. Just wondering if the district has an idea, like a deadline of when we do need to have, a decision, or if it's something that could be discussed at the next facilities meeting. It sounds like that was potentially something to consider.
One of the things I did discuss with Dr. Leck was this is a lot of information to adjust. Every slide is packed with data. So if the board isn't quite ready to move forward with this, one option we'd have is to have Dr. Leck and Mr. Gaylor meet with the facilities committee and just get into that more granularly, the process, and then I think by the next meeting, though, this is going to impact families, and I think we need a decision to them also. And so if we could somehow, if that is, we have a motion and a second on the table, but if that is another direction that the board would like, I think it would have to be done before the next meeting, which isn't that far away. So, Dan?
Yeah, so the referral notwithstanding, right now, we can discuss, do we take the minimal impact right now and then potentially having a larger impact later on once we decide the 2 versus 3. I think that's the strategic direction that we as a board should have right now. So any opinions on that one is, I guess I am kind of leaning more towards taking a smaller impact right now, just to provide guidance to the facilities committee on that direction. I think that's a fair way to move because we don't know what those other changes are going to be. We don't know that the 2 section or 3 section, we don't know necessarily how that, at least right now, we can minimize some impact and take the bigger impact once those things are decided.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing from you is another option would be to accept, if we would approve the motion and second on the table, we still can refer to facilities committee now the facilities committee has this data, and as they can talk about things in the future, there still could be a couple tweaks if there's, like the 1C, so.
Yeah, we could. I just want to get it out on the table, know what is the feeling of the board, so the facilities committee has kind of an insight into that too.
Yes, Melissa.
I also feel that the larger impact, once a new school is in place, is going to be much more palatable than it is at the beginning. So, because everybody's going to want to go to the new school.
Aaron.
Yeah, and I'm coming across on this one as, I'm not assuming that there's going to be a new school. I don't want to make that leap either. So that one's kind of a bigger question, and assuming that there is going to be, then that makes this decision a lot easier, I agree, but I don't want to make that assumption. So that's where I'm on the fence all over on this one here, so.
And even the timeline.
I would like to see us maybe just kind of understand what does this balancing the demographics actually mean. I agree that the least amount of impact from one perspective is the best. what's the best long-term, I just don't know. I'd like to do some further evaluation, get the facilities committee, I would challenge them to kind of, dig into the weeds on it and then get a recommendation of the board for the next meeting, just to vet it, go through due process on it a little bit more.
Dr. Leck?
Just to follow up end of that, I was leaning closer to 1B, understanding that, the change is never hard in making a shift from one to another, but the long-term impact to the district of shifting those demographics and balancing out those, poverty levels would have a significant impact on the district and how we serve kids. And that's probably, to me, what's the most attractive of 1B. Understanding, yes, the change would be hard, moving students around. That would never be easy. We would be asking a lot of our community, but that would be a short-term pain. To balance that out in the long term, I think would be a good thing for the district. But I understand that making the minimal amount of impact would be, the most palatable and the easiest.
Jason, did you? No. Okay. Any other discussion from the board? Jamie?
I guess I would be in favor of making a motion to refer this to the facilities committee, or do we have to vote on this prior motion first?
There's a
Okay.
motion and a second on the table. Yeah, I prefer like a plan of what, we can, there's always the opportunity to table as well, but I think we need a plan and a date. So that's what I would like to see. Dan?
In that case, I move the previous question. Vote immediately.
Okay. Chris, do you want to do a roll call vote on this one? So we have a motion and a second on the table. Let's just make sure we know what we're voting on. That to accept the Phase 1A as presented in the report. Go ahead.
Melissa Gleason? Yes. Owen McKenna?
No.
Jamie Bear?
No.
Heidi Larson?
No.
Jason Rohr?
No.
Jacob Meyer?
No.
Dan Tweeten? Aaron Roberts? Steve Veldkamp?
Okay. Is there any other motions? Jamie?
I guess I would make a motion to revert this to the facilities committee, and with the understanding that at the next board meeting, we would make a decision on the matter.
So refer to the facilities committee to
Just dig a
meet
little
with-
deeper.
And then meet with Dr. Leck and Mr.
Yeah.
Gaylor so that they can understand operationally some of we have the report on enrollment, but I think some of the questions are operationally, and then how also, I think we still always have to keep our strategic plan in mind as well. And so, and any other resources that they might need to meet with the facilities committee. Is that, okay? Is there a second? Second by Aaron. So we have a motion and a second to bring this, have facilities review it and bring it back to the next board meeting with the recommendation. And we can still have some discussion at that time. Any discussion? Jason? Oh,
Go ahead.
Jamie, did you want to clarify anything? Go ahead.
I do just also want to say, I am more inclined to lean to the least amount of impact for our families at this time, but it would be nice to have just a little bit more information for anything that we might be missing, because this is a very big decision, so.
Yep. No, I'm in agreement with you and Melissa too about the least impact, and so we'll see where this goes. Jason?
So it sounds like the board is asking for maybe a more condensed pros and cons of each plan and the long-term impact of the decision made. Is that fair? Okay.
Dr. Leck, did you want to comment?
Well, I would just comment too, if it is referred to facilities committee, I would appreciate
the questions that you have, because if there's questions that you have about what the operational impact would be, those are questions we should be having conversations with at central office and then at the facilities committee to talk those through. So please make sure that you're sharing those questions with me so I can address them with the facilities committee. So when we make a recommendation, it's a vetted, well-vetted recommendation.
Any other discussion? Do you want us just to email those to you? Okay, we can just email those in. And any other discussion? If not, Chris, do you want to do? So the motion that you're voting on now is this report is going to be referred to the Facilities Committee to review with Dr. Leck and Mr. Gaylor and discuss some of the operational questions that the board will email in and bring back, if not necessarily a recommendation, just but more of the, also include the pros and cons of operationally as well, each phase that we, 1A, between 1A and 1B. And then the board will hope to take some action at the next meeting so that we can let our families have a better understanding of how things are going to look for them in the fall, which I think we probably don't want to extend that too much longer. So go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Owen McKenna.
Yes.
Jamie Bear. Yes. Heidi Larson.
Yes.
Jason Rohr.
Yes.
Jacob Meyer.
Yes.
Dan Tweeten.
Yes.
Aaron Roberts. Steve Veldkamp. Melissa Gleason. Unanimous packet.
All right. Motion approved. And you want to work to schedule that meeting? Yep, you'll get Amy and get that meeting scheduled. Okay, very good. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? That was a lot of information. So next, the strategic plan, progress monitoring, we are not going to have tonight. We have a lot of reports. So you want to comment on that at all? Or so?
Yeah, it's in my report also. We had originally planned to also have an audit report tonight. Unfortunately, at the last minute, they had canceled, so we'll do that on March 3rd as well. But I've included the updated annual plan so you can see where we'll continue our progress monitoring.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Leck. Next on our agenda is board education. Is there? Oh, they just left. Okay. Is board education. Number 1, strategic competency, CTE vision visit. Thank you, Mr. Mark Wagner, for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, and I think, is this on? I think it's on, okay. Thank you, guys. Before I forget, thank you for serving and being such a valuable aspect of an educational setting as being on a school board. And I know a lot of times it's fun stuff that I just got to listen to, some challenging things that you need to decide on, but it's so important, and I thank you as a former educator that worked in an education system and also as a parent that you take such a valuable interest in your community and give back. A little bit about myself. I'm Mark Wagner, Assistant State Director for Career and Technical Education. I started in CT as an ag education instructor, then I moved into information technology, gotten involved and did some teaching of post-secondary and some adults, and got an administration level, both on the Class A and Class B level, and then became an area center director at North Valley, in the Grafton area, and then decided to come to what I always termed as the dark side, and I'm at the State Department. So that has come back to haunt me a time or two also, that I used to say that. So, but it's a pleasure to be here, and it's exciting to talk about what's going on here in Jamestown with the James Valley Career and Technology Center. We were here in October. It was beautiful here then. It's beautiful here again today, just a little more bite in the air, but it's still good to be in Jamestown. Let's talk a little bit about the mission of Career and Technical Education. Is the State Board of Career and Technical Education recognizes that a qualified, skilled workforce is essential to the economic well-being of North Dakota's business, industry, and public sector. And there's various steps, and due to time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that aspect of it. But let's talk about the board. State Board for Career and Technical Education is in Century Code. There's 3 members that it says has to be on that board, and that is State Superintendent Kirsten Baszler, and also Dr. Mark Hageret, the Chancellor for Higher Ed, and then the North Dakota Job Service, Pat Bertnoli. And then the rest are appointed by the governor, Ms. Sonia Meal, she is a former board member from Oaks. And Mr. Mike McHugh is the aviation out of Mandan. Ms. Lindsay Ingstrom, she's a school board member from West Hope. And then you probably know this next name, Mr. Jason Rohr is a school board member from Jamestown. And Levi Bachmeyer is a business manager from West Fargo. And then Mr. Eric Nelson is a business owner in Williston. North Dakota Century Code states that we are to administer state and federal funds that support CTE programs, facilitate career development programs, and provide North Dakota Elementary Student Entrepreneurship Program, and then also provide authority to operate and governance structure for area career and technology centers, and then provide authority to CTE to approve post-secondary career schools. These are the areas that we are involved in. The secondary one areas you're probably most familiar with, but then also I just want to mention the Career Resource Network. We also get into standards and curriculum, and then also educational equity, private schools, and special populations areas. CTSOs, the DECA, FBLA, FCCL, FFA, HOSA, Skills USA, and TSA are all organizations that we support. There's our state director, Mr. Wade Sick, with all the presidents of the CTO organizations. We bring them all together in June, and I've had the pleasure of presenting and working with them for the past number of years, and that is so good for someone like myself to see that we don't have a problem with youth. Youth they're doing okay, and we got future leaders that are going to be here for a long time, so it's always an exciting part to be a part of. Our goals and opportunities, just wanted to touch a little bit about that, is the transition to a new program where reimbursement platform, and then access our CT capital funds. You've probably heard we have some new career area centers across the state in the process of getting those finalized. And then another goal is to increase enrollment in CT concentrator numbers. We have participants, we have concentrators. Concentrators is a student that takes 2 or more credits in one area. For example, if they take 2 credits in business, then they are a business education concentrator. Study and potentially restructure our CT funding model. We've been talking about that, I'm going to be honest with you, for 6 years, but we're getting close. I think we're going to a flat funding model rather than just based on reimbursement. And then another goal that the state board has is coordinate the virtual CT between the virtual offerings. We have a lot of the centers that provide some of that. We have the Center for Distance Ed, want to coordinate that and all work together to make that the best for our students. And then expand the work-based learning opportunities through some additional work-based learning coordinators. All with a goal to have a future without limits, which takes equity, quality program and instructors, meaningful public-private partnerships, actionable data, and then continuous improvement and collaborative leadership. Let's talk a little bit about the program vision visit, what we did when we were here and the process of it. But the purpose is the commitment to quality North Dakota CT education programs. Federal Carl Perkins legislation says we must go out and evaluate the programs. It's also a policy from our state board. But the real reason that we come out here is to help. And I know that when you work for the State Department, you come out, we're here to help. That makes people think, okay, really? But no, we are here to help, to try to learn and grow and to have that vision without any limits. And CTE programs such as what's here at James Valley and Jamestown, they're going to equal the success. We do 10 to 12 per year. It's on a 5-year rotation. Everything I'm talking about tonight is on our website, also our North Dakota CTE website if you're interested in further studying it. There's select schools through a ranking process. They're broken into some different categories: post-secondary, career and technical centers, comprehensive high schools with 4 or more programs, and then comprehensive high schools with 3 or less programs. This is our vision visit schedule. We started out at Kandeska Community College in Fort Totten, went to Dunseith, Rugby, came here to Jamestown, had a Rough Rider Virtual Center that's based in Western North Dakota, and then West Fargo High School, Southwest Area CT Center based out of Dickinson, and then we went to the Bismarck State College. Actually, it wasn't in December. We ended up in January because they had another evaluation, so we moved it. So we just completed that not very long ago. This is just a 5-year schedule. So everybody's on the schedule. Schools and centers such as the size of Jamestown, we come every 5 years. So what it consists of, it's a self-program review. All the instructors are sent to, and administrators are sent to survey, and then we come out and do an on-site review, and then we have an exit review. It's based on 12 standards of qualities. You say, wait a minute, there's 10 listed there? They're based on 12. We just combined a couple of them to make sure that it just was an ease and for use to combine them when we did our survey and our process. This is just an example of the questionnaire that all the instructors and the CT administrators get. It's just a ranking of 0, not all achieved, 1 is minimally achieved, 2 is moderately achieved, and then 3 is substantially achieved. Example of what it looks like, just the questions they pick, and there's an area in the bottom there where they can explain their answers. This is an example of the instructors here. We do not come out and do evaluations of instructors. That's somebody else's job. We know that a strong instructor usually leads to a strong program, but that's not our job to come out and say that the instructor's doing good or bad or indifferent. We do the programs. So our on-site review consists of an overview of those standards and self-review with the instructor. And then we have a 15-minute exit review with the instructor, administration, and supervisor, and then online survey to get to learn and grow on how we did. And then within 10 days, institution will receive a written report from the Department of CTE. There's just a quick example of the agenda. The program exits, someone that gets to sit on all of them. It's fun, but it's intense. I mean, it's fun to hear all the good stuff, but it's a while to sit there and listen. Good thing our state supervisors are entertaining at times, so that helps too. So there's accommodations. That review consists of the strengths of the programs. We know there's lots of good things going on. We want to highlight that here. Recommendations, just opportunities that can improve the program. Our state supervisors go not only to all of these that were listed on the where the 10 to 12 team evaluation vision visits, they go to all those other ones that are listed for each year. So they have a lot of windshield time. They see a lot of things, and they can share. I'm sure they borrowed things from James Valley and Jamestown as well to share with other schools at times. And then violations. That's the requirements to fulfill the intent of the law or policy. Within 10 days, if there is any violations, the plan of action is then sent to that schools, and then the institution requesting that the completed report be returned in 30 days. Basically, that report is action of what, who, and when, what's going to be done, when, and who is it responsible for doing it. Let's talk a little about the Jamestown program vision visit and the James Valley. I'm going to talk about the violations, recommendations, and accommodations in that order. I'd like to end on a positive note, and there's lots of positives, very minor violations and recommendations, but I do want to touch on a couple of them. One of the violations was updating the coordinated plans of study. It just didn't match our CTE coordinated plans of study, and then also they were missing maybe some opportunities. For example, like one area, the co-op or the work-based learning was not listed as an opportunity for them. And then the other one was the advisory committee. One of the advisory committees is serving business, education, marketing, and information, which we don't really have a problem with that. That's fine if you want to combine them. But the issue was that there has to be 3 or more in each of those areas, and that wasn't the case. So all these things that I'm talking to you about today about recommendation violations have already been taken care of. So that's how minor that they were. On the other recommendations, we never hear storage is an issue when we go out and visit places. As you know, schools and centers, that's kind of I shouldn't say the afterthought, but a lot of times that's the areas that cut. So we just encourage that explore options to increase space and storage where available to enhance the organization within certain areas. And then continue to look at the start of CT organizations in the appropriate program areas that have an impact on the culture and student involvement. Questions so far? Should have told you at the beginning that you could ask questions at any time, but.
Any questions from the board at this point? Okay, thank you.
highlight some accommodations, some great things that are going on here that I want to just mention to you. There's a strong commitment to delivering the high quality in CTE by employing innovative instructional strategies. There's some project-based learning going on. There's industry partnerships. There's just an awful lot of good things that are going on that you should be proud of. To equip those students with the real practical skills, to be successful in the real world. We hear a lot about trades right now as a hot topic. We need trades and all that. And that's good, but when I went to school, trades meant that then you went to work right away. And that might be the case now, but for the most part, now that I'll just use this as an example. We had our, at the Capitol, we had, James Valley was there with students we're talking about, and I visited with these two young men from the Watford City area. And they were graduating. I said, okay, what's your plans? I always like to find out, well, I'm going to be an apprentice. They were going to be an apprentice to these different manufacturing things. I said, oh, well, then what are you thinking about doing? He goes, well, if the apprentice goes well for them and for me, they're going to send me to school. I said, wait a minute, they're going to send you to school? Yep. That's kind of a good deal. They go, no, that's a real good deal. Hopefully that works out. So things have changed, that there's a lot of opportunities for them to do that. That work-based, career-ready skills that students get, doesn't matter if they're going to a four-year, whatever they're going into. When I was at North Valley, I'll just share this also with you. Had a young lady who decided to go in the medical. She wanted to be a doctor. It was obvious she was going to be a doctor. Decided not to go to UND. UND didn't give her as good opportunity as Duke did, which I think maybe UND missed the boat, but sometimes that happens, that different things. So she came back and I asked her, I said, what was the most valuable class you took in high school setting? Well, I was thinking, advanced biology, physiology, whatever those classes were. She goes, oh, that was easy. It was my med terminology class. I said, really? That was one of my first classes. He says, when I got out there, the other students, they didn't understand the Latin terms. So they always had to look stuff up. She said, I was ahead of them in that aspect. To me, that's kind of cool when they come back and they say those types of things, that it's valuable for all students. Administration's active support of all professional development. We heard that loud and clear. You should be proud of your administration. It starts with Dr. Leck and goes down through the channels. He supports his CTE people. The CTE administrators support the instructors to make sure that they have the professional development that they need to stay current and to get the job done. Dedicated and highly qualified CTE personnel. All of them are qualified, CTE certified, a lot of them are leaders in their organizations and take a leadership role in making sure that not only is their classroom better, but their professionalism is better. So I commend you for that also. Maintaining optimal student-teacher ratios. There's at times, like at welding, if you have 12 welding booths, it's pretty tough to have 20 students. You're very careful to make sure there's an adequate equipment there or students, so they have the opportunity where they can be successful. It makes that environment very conducive to learning. It's a very strong commitment that you guys have, and I appreciate that. In forging strong partnerships with local industries. Visited with Dr. Leck earlier about CDL and some of the industries that are stepping up in that role. And then promotes CT organizations. It's nice to walk into that area center and to see the leadership organizations that are available to them. But also I want to also compliment Heidi and Adam in that when you walk into that, there's also a feel for those students that are coming from the other schools. And that's important. They feel like that they are not just coming to Jamestown, they're coming to an area center located in Jamestown. And we've heard that from students that they felt weren't intimidated. They felt like, okay, this is my place too. This is pretty cool. And then a dedicated work-based learning coordinator. You're ahead of the game where you have somebody that's already doing that. Appreciate that you've put that in place, and that is in the works. We want all our CTE programs held to highest standards of excellence. How can we help that process and the best practices? We use an improvement model. How do we improve? And we want to work together towards achieving that vision. That concludes my report. And as you know, I'm in the loop of legislatively, so I stand for any questions. I guess what you usually say when you get done making a presentation. So,
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board at this time?
Not even Jason? I thought for sure he'd just set me up somehow with being on the state board now. Yeah, I got it. I'd like to stay longer, but I think I'm going to try to beat the weather before it gets too cold too, so head west, so.
Thank you, Mark Wagner,
Yep,
for
thank you guys, and
taking-
sincere thank you for all that you do. Appreciate it, not only at CTE, but what you do for across North Dakota in education, and this is awesome to see what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Mark.
All right. Any complaints, just forward them to Jason, right? So, under board we have, next on our agenda, we have the superintendent's report. Dr. Leck.
Yeah, my written report. One comment I'll point out in personnel, there was discussion at our last meeting regarding J1 cultural exchange professionals. We did go through the process and complete a draft onboarding procedure that incorporated what we do for onboarding, as well as some of the other requirements and recommendations for J1 cultural exchange program teachers. We will have a recommendation for hire at our next meeting for a J1 individual. There were some additional questions that came up related to benefits, so we didn't have that individual available at this time. Sydney Larson, I'll just point out quickly, this is a resident teacher program participant, so you have an MOU, not a personnel hire form. There's an MOU related to this individual, and I'm happy to answer questions if you had any about that. But essentially, what we would be doing is paying for coursework and salary, which would ensure us to have this individual for 3 years after the completion of the program. So it's really a pretty good deal for all involved. Lastly, under personnel, the middle school principal timeline, I have a draft timeline that we have started for the middle school principal position. And Mr. Meyer is representing the board on that hiring process. And we'll have teachers, administrators, and myself, and that process has been started last week. We'll meet again on Wednesday. Washington Elementary transition, this will continue to be a place on my report until, throughout the rest of the semester likely. I've just outlined a few different things that have transpired since our last meeting. We did have that survey that was sent. We had 19 total respondents. I'll use that to create an FAQ. We've gotten some good feedback on strategies. I had an email just today from a teacher, Emma Mickelson, that had some outstanding ideas for activities, how we can honor staff, honor the building. I thought that were really good, things that we'll continue to work on. And I did go through, we had, as I talked at our last meeting, we had the completion of a staff survey, for a preference survey on the 5th of February. That Friday, so the 7th, I was able to reach out individually to each of those staff members, to let each of the certified staff members, to let them know either a placement or how we've kind of honed down that big group of 20 plus things down. And we were able to do placements for quite a few, some with non-certified staff as well. And I've listed all of those positions, but at the very least, we're starting to narrow for those that, we weren't able to make a placement. They're not all easy. It's not all, just moving from A to B. I wish it were that simple, and I'm sure our staff wishes it was that simple as well. And our priority is going to continue to be those with continuing contracts, but I do believe that the best solution also includes those that have that are non-continuing contracts. From a long-term staffing standpoint, that would be beneficial to us as well. And so we'll continue to look for those options, but I have listed, like I said, all of those positions that we have made placements to already, some of those certified, some of those non-certified. With bargaining units, I'm on page 3 here, but bargaining units, and there's a recent Supreme Court ruling that you likely heard about that narrowed the definition. There was a ruling called the Hilton ruling that had kind of been a long-standing definition of what constitutes a teacher as it relates to North Dakota Century Code, because it's one of those few positions that it treats teacher different than other employees, and some of that's bargaining, but there's been a long-standing ruling called the Hilton ruling that define teachers very, very broadly. And this recent Supreme Court ruling narrowed that definition pretty significantly. So we went from a very broad to a much more narrow version of what defines a teacher, and that's important for the board because bargaining rights could be limited, based on Century Code to a teacher. So if a teacher is somebody who is more narrowly defined, but bargaining in the past was based on a very broad definition of teacher, districts across North Dakota right now are grappling with that question. Well, do we change our bargaining units then? If in the past it was broadly defined and now it's narrowly defined, is it beneficial to act on our old definition or act on this new definition? That's kind of the simplistic version of that issue. But from my perspective, my recommendations is that what we have operated with makes sense. I don't see the benefit at this time of changing what that definition of teacher means. I think there would be a mostly negative impact to those that have negotiated under a certain standard, certain understanding. I think the process has been equitable, it's been fair, it's been working, and it would feel arbitrary without some reason or benefit to make that change. I think as you go across the state, the bulk of school districts are operating that way, although there are some that have other factors, and I'm certainly not judging them because they have factors that they have to work through that are making that choice to go with the more narrow definition. My recommendation would be to maintain exactly what you have because it's worked, unless you have a reason to make that change or if there is some benefit or need that's pushing you to make that change. The last item outside of Spotlight that I have relates to the Legislative Assembly. Still about 1,000 bills. I highlighted a few. 2241 relates to public charter schools. So if you're not familiar with what a charter school is, it's kind of in the middle between, private and a public. It is a public school, but by its name, it operates by a charter, and it creates its own rules as far as what that charter looks like. They have universal enrollment. They can't deny members, although they may have limitations, but those have to be equitable to everybody. For example, you couldn't say, well, we have no special education students, or you can't do this. It has to be open to a lottery or some other mechanism to control your enrollment that's not discriminatory. North Dakota is one of the few states in the union that charter schools are not allowed. And the reason that has been a long-standing rule is because of the very rural nature of North Dakota. Having two public operating public schools in a small rural community, say Bowbells, that would be, from a cost analysis standpoint from the state, that doesn't make a lot of sense to have two competing public schools. And that could happen in a charter school. So that's one of the reasons why charters have never advanced. And across the country, you'll see a mixed bag of charter success. You'll see very successful charters, and you'll see unsuccessful charter schools. So, that's currently out there. 1244 is an income tax credit for home education students. 1607, 1590, 1540, and 2303. Those are all related to vouchers, ESAs, education savings accounts. Those are all in that realm. 1540 has passed the House already, so you can look to see what that one is. One of the more aggressive ESA bills that are out there did pass the House, but there are a lot of different versions that haven't been voted on yet. This is one of those topics that oftentimes you can look at what happens in committee and assume, okay, well, we know what's going to happen on the floor. It's a mixed bag there. That could receive a do not pass out of committee and pass on the floor. So just where it's at in committee isn't necessarily going to help you really determine. What I can tell you is that none of these bills that you can find on ESAs is probably the final bill. There's going to be a lot of negotiations and discussions. This will come to conference committee. A couple different versions will pass. They'll go to conference committee and decide if one does pass, what is it going to look like? So there's a lot of work to do in that area before you can even begin to assume what that's going to look like. I brought up 1369 in the past, and that is the K-12 funding bill. That right now represents a 3% increase and a change to the special education factor. 1475 is the surviving universal meals. So that would provide a bill that would provide breakfast and lunch to all students. There was another bill out there. Really the only difference between the two is where it came from. Is it general fund spending or was it legacy fund earnings? So not directly from the legacy fund, but legacy fund earnings. But that one already failed. And so the surviving universal meal bill is actually 1475. I would make the case that if you really want education savings accounts across all different classifications, best way to do it, universal meals. Pay for universal meals for every student, K through 12, in private, public, and you have a pretty good equitable ESA. The spotlight that I have, one of the most fun things that I get to do every year that really tests my pronunciation, by the way, is the spelling bee. We have 16 students in this room. About a week ago, they had a written spelling competition, 50 words, and then 6 of them advanced onto the oral competition, and they spell another 5 words. They did outstanding. In the 12 years of doing this, I think this was the hardest collection of 55 words that I've seen. And they were really, really good. The students, not just the students that advanced that I've listed here, but all the students did really, really well. But first place, Parker Geisler, who's in the 7th grade, it's his 3rd straight win. Second place was his brother Carson, who's a 5th grader looking to continue on the family domination lately. And then Harper Wolf did an amazing job as well. She's an 8th grader at the middle school here. So they did fantastic. It was a lot of fun. We always have families that come and watch. I always challenge them a little bit. The words start off pretty easy. They get pretty hard. So they do a great job, but I wanted to spotlight those students for doing a fantastic job. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Any questions on the superintendent report? Okay. Dan?
I just wanted to comment on the bargaining units discussion because we did go to the negotiations. Jason and I did go to the negotiations seminar to kind of get briefed on what these were, and there was a lot of discussion around the room regarding that ruling, and we kind of came to the same conclusion. There's no reason to change that, regardless of what the Century Code definition is. We have a good bargaining unit definition. It's like you said, it works well for our district and for the school board and for the JEA. So that was just wanted to echo that for the rest of the board members too. That there was a lot of discussion that we had last week.
That's great, Dan. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, discussion? Okay. If not, moving forward in our agenda, we have nothing under G, old business, H, new business, nothing under activities, buildings and grounds, curriculum instruction, under finance, certificate of deposit renewal. Christy, did you want to comment on that?
As you know, we have 3 separate CD certificates of deposit, and 2 of them are coming due in March. I have called around, and I would recommend just renewing the Dakota Bank CD for 7 months at a 4%, and the Bank Forward for 12 months at 3.85%. But we have a healthy ending fund balance, and we could get a little extra interest for the next year. So that's be my recommendation.
Thank you, Christy, for the explanation. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron, second by Dan. We have a motion and a second to renew Jason.
I'll declare a conflict on this as an employee of Bank Forward.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. So please note that. So we have a motion and a second for approval of the 2 CDs as 2, right, that Christy described, and at the current rates and locations. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. B and C are general fund balance and monthly financial reports. Just for your information, are there any questions for Christy at this time about those? Okay. If not, moving on, nothing under operations. Under personnel, we have approval of resident teacher memorandum of understanding for Sydney Larson. Is there a motion? Motion by Steve. Second by Jacob. We have a motion and a second for approval of resident teacher memorandum of understanding for Sydney Larson. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Welcome, Sydney. B, approval of petition of recognition of representatives organization negotiation unit for administrators. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan. Second by Jason. We have a motion and a second for approval of petition for recognition of representative organization negotiation unit for administrators. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Oh, yep, got it. Okay, yep. And then under C, we have approval of petition for recognition of representative organization for negotiation unit for teachers. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan. Second by Aaron. We have a motion and a second for approval of petition for recognition of representative organization of negotiation unit for teachers. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. D, approval of resignation at the conclusion of the 2024 to 2025 school year. Janelle Munson. Is there a motion? Motion by Jamie. Second? Is there a second by Steve? So motion and second for approval of resignation at the conclusion of the 2024 to 2025 school year for Janelle Munson. And we appreciate all of her years of service to the district, for sure. Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Superintendent evaluation timeline is there for your information. Under policy and procedures, A, approval of policy and procedure. Number 1, amended policy ICCB, disposal of school equipment and supplies. Is there a motion? Motion by Jamie. Second by Dan. We have a motion and a second for approval of policies and procedures, amended policy ICCB, disposal of school equipment and supplies. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Nothing under tuition, nothing under other. Items for future agenda. Are there any items at this time that you'd like to see on future agendas? If not, at any time you have something, please contact myself or Dr. Leck to get it on the agenda. Meetings to be scheduled. A, Health Insurance Committee meeting on Wednesday, February 19th, 2025 at 3:45 p.m. in the District Office Conference Room. District Improvement Committee meeting on Thursday, February 20th, 2025 at 3:30 p.m. in the High School Media Center. Note that's at the high school. School Board meeting on Monday, March 3rd, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. A finance or a facilities committee meeting will be scheduled between now and posted between now and March 3rd. Any other meetings that we're missing at this time on here? Okay. If not, our next agenda item is the possible executive session to discuss negotiation strategies. Is there a motion for that at this time? Okay. If not, then we'll move on to our agenda. Our monthly superintendent evaluation is Section 1, Goal and Vision Setting, and Section 6, Operation and Resource Management. There being no further business before the board, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.